Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here tonight with my co-host, Gail Burke, and we have as our guest this evening, John Mullady. And you probably recognize him from the Beverly School Committee, but tonight he's here in his other role as a history teacher at Manchester High School. But before we start with John, Gail has a top of the page.
Good evening. By the time you see this show, the inauguration of our 45th president will have come and gone. I just wanted to say a few words about the inauguration, which is going to happen on Friday, and the people who are having a problem accepting that Donald Trump is going to be our new president. I think in the schools and colleges, a lot of students have been very hysterical about the fact that their candidate lost. And I just want to say to all of them, you have to look at this election as the way our Constitution works. He was elected fair and square. The Electoral College cast their votes, and he is the winner. So I say congratulations to President Trump. Thank you. Good evening, John.
Good evening.
As a high school history teacher, you had written a letter to the editor. And I wanted to start off by asking you, you say that the students came in the day after election and were very upset. And I wondered what kinds of questions and what were they upset about?
Sure. So I can talk to you a little bit about what happened. So the day after the election, some students expressed concerns for family members that were openly gay. There were some students who were concerned about their own well-being. Some students who've either they have immigrated from other countries or members of their family have concerned about what's going to happen to them. I think I would like to clarify that what originally happened is that Wednesday night, I drafted what I intended to be a letter to my female students in my classes, and then came into school on Thursday, showed a couple of my coworkers, and they thought it would be good for all my students to see, and then I submitted that to the editor. So it wasn't originally intended to be for everybody. So to go back to your original question, I think those are some concerns that they expressed about what was going to happen to people that they know or people in their family. And I also think that oftentimes, not just teenagers, but some people, if they hear segments of the news and they don't fully understand, there's just this element of confusion. There was a lot of confusion for people that going forward for that day.
But did the teachers in the school, I mean, let's face it, it's a historical moment, suited to a history teacher, I would assume, explaining about the Constitution, how the electoral process works. Was that done for these kids? Because I don't know, I have the feeling that not a whole lot of American history is being taught throughout the grades. Now, I don't know what it's like at Manchester High School.
So our curriculum, US 1, is where we learn and teach about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the amendment process, and the election. So that's its own unit. So hopefully, knock on wood, that students have a basic foundation for that. So I'm assuming that they understand how the process works, and I don't think the process necessarily upsets students as much as the outcome. And in some cases, I don't think students were upset that their candidate didn't win. I don't want to put myself in the mindset of or tell people how they should feel or how they felt. But I know that there were some of my students who were really upset over the comments that President Trump had made in the past about women, and just the sense that if a person who is on the record talking about women and objectifying them can be elected to the highest office, then it's almost, what does that tell you about the way women are viewed in society? And as someone who, I try to teach all my students to value everyone's opinions, but I feel in particular that it's a lot easier for a high school boy to objectify a girl than it is for a girl to objectify a boy. And the cases of bullying or comments that are being said on students' social media accounts, the overwhelming majority of them are boys targeting girls, not the other way around. So I have sisters who are around high school age, one who is in community college and another who's a senior in high school. And I thought about her and had a phone conversation with her about it. And she's been someone who has been called certain terms by people, and just trying to let her feel that, you can't let one person, define you. And that was one of the purposes of the letter. Another purpose of the letter was to teach students to and encourage them to leave their bubble. I feel as though, and I think that term has been outplayed a lot by the media, so I'll stop saying bubble, but to leave our comfort zone. And I tell my students that every time you Google a candidate, you Google a person, and you read an article about them. So I like Bernie Sanders. I canvassed for him in New Hampshire and gave him too much money that my wife would probably, I'm not going to tell you how much money I gave Liz, but anyway. I liked an article.
We won't tell.
Sorry. I liked an article about Bernie. So then the algorithm remembers that. So next time I go and look up Bernie Sanders in Google, similar articles come up. And I think I was very guilty of kind of closing myself in and narrowing my information feed. And I'm concerned that that's become a pattern with a lot of people, that we don't branch out and leave our comfort zones and talk to people we don't always agree with. I think, when it comes down to it, we forgot that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here. I don't think I agree with every single policy that is said between you and George, but I value your opinion. I hope you value mine. And when you reached out to me with that email, I was thrilled. I was very happy that, this should happen more. So, I didn't get a chance to thank you for having me on here, but thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Well, when I first read the letter, I was reading it, I highlighted some things, and
You did your homework.
I try. And I got the part about the bullying, and, you didn't mention Trump's name, nor did you mention Hillary Clinton's name. It was obvious what you were discussing. But through this whole election process, in the media, I feel has been, the media are very liberal for the most part, including the Salem News. And I felt that even though I didn't always agree with what Donald Trump said or what he did, but on the other hand, some of the things and some of his ideas have now come to the forefront of what he actually wants to do as president. And in the background, there was always, how do you compare what he said to what Bill Clinton actually did? Mm-hmm. So when you talk about bullying and being a misogynist and the way he treats women, I have to equate it with what Bill Clinton did and what Donald Trump said. Mm-hmm. Two very different things. And one seemed to get away with it scot-free, and the other one that's always there in his face. And I find that to be ridiculous. As you can see by the treatment of his wife and his family, his daughters, and that sort of thing. So I think in the campaign rhetoric, a lot of things get said, and a lot of dirt gets dragged up. And
Well, I think one of the things you're missing is there's a particular line in your letter where you're talking about this being a kind of different campaign than we've used to. This is a relatively short-term look at history. There's a very good book out by Eric Burns called The Infamous Scribblers, in which he goes through the kinds of editorializing, reporting that was happening when the Founding Fathers were running around. And some of that stuff is nasty.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of what was said about Trump or Clinton or either one, Bill or Hillary, kind of on the tame side. So there is a long-term history of going back and forth. I mean, the one that blew my mind was the comment that Jefferson was bribing editors to publish information, very nasty stuff about his opponents. And so it got to everybody. But that was the way the game was played in those days.
But the problem today is it's in your face immediately, and it gets played and replayed and replayed and replayed, so that after a while you get this terrible impression of something, a comment that was made 10 years ago, and then that's what you're stuck with.
Well, I think this is where we need to, have people like John explain that, hey, this has been going on for quite some time, and the point you made earlier about looking at stuff outside of your comfort zone, outside your bubble, whatever you want to call it, and get a much broader opinion. And the thing that bothers me is it's now to the point where you cannot depend upon the media to give you a straight story.
Right.
And there's a good article I read recently that described the good old days of Walter Cronkite and
Uncle
There-
Walter, yes.
yeah, and Edward R. Murrow, and on it went. And those were people that, when they spoke, you had some confidence in what they're saying. And I think what has happened, and what this article pointed out, is there's been a shift that reporters are now thinking more along the lines of editorializing. So I can pick this piece of information, I can pick that one, I'll leave that one out. And yes, it's all factual, but it's been selective to present their agenda. And I think this is one of the messages that has to get out to the kids in school, that you got to read a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And you were
Yeah.
right about picking stuff from both sides and not just a couple of articles that sort of,
It's called cognitive dissonance. Yes, where you just pick the stuff
pick
that
what
you
you
like.
want, yeah.
Now,
that
you
agrees
wrote
with
this
you.
letter a month ago now. What's changed with the students since then? Anything?
I've had two different groups of students, both led by girls who have tried to start after-school clubs. One student had this idea of making the club where it would be about finding resolutions. So, and I think in her mind, she envisions it as almost a sort of civic debate club. So finding a topic and then inviting different students to come in and try to draft up some sort of resolution. I had another student come and see me, and she wanted to start some sort of, she didn't want to use the term feminist, but a women's empowerment club, where she was thinking about finding different ways for women to, or young women in the high school, to find different opportunities to get involved, whether it's in local politics, state politics, federal politics, journalism, medicine, and things like that. And she would like, I think she said, she would like to create some sort of scholarship for a female leadership position. So that's, those girls met with me later on that week. And then in terms of, my day-to-day classes, trying to have the students, if they're going to do a current events assignment, they have to show it from multiple sources. To go back to what you said about the media, we did this lesson for the Industrial Revolution. We're talking about monopolies and horizontal and lateral integration, and have the kids guess how many different media companies are in the United States today versus 1983. So they were pretty shocked when they learned that in 1983, 1980s, there were about 50 different media companies. Today there's 6. So trying to teach the kids, well, where are you getting your news source? If you're getting your news source from NBC, what are the business connections that NBC has with different parties? What are the business connections that Fox has with different parties, and things like that. An author once said, there are no ordinary lives in extraordinary times, and I try to emphasize that to my students as well.
Now, when you say that the girls are trying to start something, do you get the feeling that they feel that they have to do this? Is there like a competition between themselves and the boys, or do they feel like the boys don't respect them the same way? Sometimes I hear about this girl, boy, man, woman thing, and it's like, it's almost like blacks and whites and different, I mean, why does everything have to be broken down into either gender or race or religion? Can't people get together regardless of all of those,
Yeah.
and just have ideas, and just have, instead of just having an all-girl thing or an all-boy thing, have a group that can get together and discuss, for instance, politics, something about maybe a specific thing, the election, and have them come at it from different viewpoints, and what happened, what could be made better, what do you think we should do in the future, and do you really understand the workings of the government?
I think, to speak on my own experiences, I grew up and went to school never having to really consider, my gender or my race.
Yeah.
Going for a job interview, or going to a store, or even applying to schools or speaking up in class. And over my 11 years of teaching, I've had colleagues and students, current students and former students, talk about that they feel that pressure, that as a girl, if they speak out too much in class, they might be looked down upon, or someone might say something negative about them behind their back. I know my wife, when she applied for a management job at a genetics lab, that going into that type of field as a woman in a predominantly male category, that there was this pressure. And I don't think it's just internal. I do think there is some external pressures that people feel. But what I try to emphasize is I only know what I know. So if someone who I worked with at a previous job was gay and didn't feel comfortable having pictures of them with their partner and their family on their desk because they were concerned about how they would be looked at by their students or by their coworkers, then I'm not going to tell that person that what they're feeling is wrong necessarily.
But do you think that has kind of gotten better as far as, people who are gay are now more comfortable with their sexuality and with the fact that people know? And I don't know, the people that I know, it's not that big a deal anymore. Maybe a surprise sometimes when you find out, but then it's like, well, okay, what you do is your business.
I just started this book called Hope in the Dark, which is taken from a Virginia Woolf diary entry on the eve of World War I. Actually, World War I was about 6 months old. And she talked about the future was being in the dark, but for her, the dark wasn't negative. The dark was the unknown. And that's one of the emphasis very early in the book, but it talks about, amnesia creates bias and racism and problems. Like, people forget what the previous generation fought for. So in terms of, let's say we're focusing on gay rights, well, they don't necessarily would be shocked or don't remember that homosexuality was illegal, or that certain places in cities and communities were being raided by the police. For them, they just think this is kind of where we're at without knowing what the struggle was. And I think that's something that, as a teacher, that I need to do a better job of reminding my students of how, we got to certain places, so they can understand, why certain terms or certain phrases or certain flags or certain symbols mean that way to people, and what's the context behind that.
Well, but the problem I see now, though, is that everybody is offended so easily by anything. For instance, the Confederate flag. All of a sudden, that becomes an offensive symbol. Well, Maybe to some people it does. What about those people who fought for the Confederacy? They were heroes down there too, and now they can't fly that flag anymore.
I wouldn't say it all of a sudden became offensive. I think it was
Well-
offensive for
Well, it's always
a lot
been
of
offensive
people.
to a certain group.
To a
Now that
certain group, yeah.
Now that certain group is expanding
Right.
and letting everybody know that,
Yeah.
hey, that ain't a good thing to do anymore. And you get into this very serious issue of how do you react to somebody else's sensitivities? You see it all the time. I'm into jokes an awful lot. And one of the things that bothers me is that you have to be very careful on telling jokes to people. What is their background? Will they be offended by it? And it's meant to be funny and gay and light. And
Yep.
that's another word.
Oh, you said that word.
One of my favorite cartoons from Playboy. It's the guy standing in front of a mirror, slipping into a black lace bra and panties, and he's singing, "Now we don our gay apparel." But that is part of the problem, that what used to be a phrase that had a certain meaning,
Yeah.
now it has been, I shouldn't say corrupted, but it's been
Turned into
co-opted
something
by
else.
a different group for a different
Yeah.
reason.
Political correctness.
Well, I mean, now everyone in Beverly knows, George, that you got Playboy for the articles and the
Yeah.
cartoons,
Oh,
so
yeah.
we can put that
I like
to
the
rest.
cartoons, yes.
I mean, the English language, I mean, different words over time evolve and develop different meanings. So, there's a phrase, and I grew up in an Italian American household where if someone was acting kind of a goof or like a klutz, my grandmother or grandfather would call them a mameluke. What I didn't know, which I don't think my grandparents knew, is that was a term used in some slave-holding colonies
Yeah.
to describe someone who was of mixed race. But
But if you don't even know and you say it, who is it offending?
Well, the people that know what it really means.
When they hear it, like,
Yeah.
but but the people that are saying it are not saying it to be offensive, and
Right.
that's where you have this, back and forth,
Well,
and this.
when I was younger, the word gay was often used to describe something in a negative light. So if you wore, a shirt, or if you didn't like a test or a movie, that was a pretty quick way to just say
Yeah.
like that was gay. Not
He's
realize.
not from our generation,
No,
is he?
that's
No.
not registered.
No, but I think my point is, you get to a certain, or I got to a certain point in my life where I realized, using this word to describe something negative, is the word that someone uses. That's how they identify, and that it's not okay to use that word. So another one that I am constantly trying to limit the use of my students is if someone does something dumb or like a bonehead move, students will say like, that's retarded.
Yeah.
And, that is not the proper use of that word. So, I mean, I'm sure that this could be a separate show on BevCam, like what words mean what and the origin of words, but I think the language is important on
Yeah,
what you
and
say. what
The
you do.
language keeps changing, and fortunately, there's something called Urban Dictionary that I can go look up. What did he say, and what does that really mean, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
I'm actually on Urban Dictionary.
Yeah.
If you, I'm serious. If you type in Mr. Mullady,
Yeah.
one of my students 8 years ago wrote a definition, and I'll tell it to you. It's a large, heavyset man who often wears colorful ties and tries to be funny. So,
Okay.
That sounds like Elliot.
Yeah. But that's part of the problem, that the slang
Yeah.
keeps changing.
Yeah.
You and I would know what a doofus means, but he hasn't the foggiest
Yeah.
idea. And it changes with time, and that makes it difficult when you're dealing from different age groups. And I can remember, I did a little teaching when I retired, and I'm listening to the kids, and I'm not sure what they're talking about, and they're not sure what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, because there's that much disparity between the phrases we use, the way we use them, kind of thing. So, yeah, there's a joke about being too politically correct, but at the same time, how do you communicate somebody without irritating them?
Well,
And for instance, I was reading through your letter, and you talk about consoling the students. Okay, that's fine. And then you say later on, they're angry. Now, why were they angry and not disappointed?
Yeah, what were they angry about?
So some of the students were angry that a person who has been, to kind of circle back, who's been on the record for essentially bragging about sexual assault,
Yeah.
got elected president. I think some students were angry the same way you might be angry, that I was angry that the Giants lost. Like you're angry that your team didn't win. So I think there's some elements of that, and I think there's some students that are angry because they feel as though that they don't agree with the Electoral College, which, when you said earlier in the show, it's part of the Constitution. So
Right.
if they're angry, then there are legal channels that citizens can go through to try to bring about change.
But
I'm also dealing with teenagers, and I feel
Yeah.
like that's a pretty significant chunk of their brain is emotion.
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. But I mean, there's been a lot of debate during this election about the Electoral College, and I don't think most people understand why the Electoral College was put into place by the founding fathers in order to be fair. And of course, fairness is a big thing
that is
today.
a loaded word, because you cannot really define fair
Yes.
in an abstract fashion.
Well, to
But
the-
the problem I think with the Electoral College that doesn't get explained is it was originally created because most people didn't have the foggiest idea who was running and anything about them, and there was only a certain number of people who were connected well enough to be able to make a decision about who was there. Then they got into the issue of tyranny of a minority, and got into this morning of the why that if you take out the plurality that Hillary got in California and New York, Trump won not only the electoral vote, but he won the majority of the votes. And now you start to wonder should the country be controlled by the elite on either coast?
Yeah.
Well, if you
That's what you're getting
if you
into.
didn't count portions of slaves as part of the population of the census, I don't think you would have 4 of the 5 first presidents
Oh,
be
yeah.
from slaveholding
Yeah.
states.
There's
But
a
what I'm
whole
getting
bunch-
at is, if you look at the origin of the Electoral College, you are protecting slaveholding states and you're protecting slavery. And I don't think that's me being, a moonbat, as Howie would say. I think there's...
That was a difficult problem that they could not resolve
Yeah.
when they formed the Constitution. And as a result, they just compromised and said, okay, we'll just
but
paper it over and go on.
But also,
Well,
majority of
this is-
Americans...
We have
sorry.
to, I'm
We
sorry.
got a minute and 25
We have
seconds
a
left.
minute.
I think we can
minute
solve everything in 90 seconds.
Yes.
Cabinet positions, here we come.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this has been a great discussion. I mean, we could go on with this and do several more shows, but
Well, this is part of the protection of democracy. Like, not to be, over dramatic, but it's
No,
local.
you're right.
It's
You're right.
local
Yeah.
people addressing local population.
Yeah.
So I think what you guys are doing is very important. And
Well, thank
we
you very
everyone
appreciate
at
much.
Beth
somebody
Camp,
like
thank you.
yourself willing
Yeah.
to step up and get involved with
Yeah,
us.
yeah.
And
And we'd love to have you come back to talk about
you
the same thing.
you have
And
my
may-
email address.
Maybe you can go back to your students, and we'll give you a copy of the show, so you can possibly run it during one of your classes.
That would be so great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion tonight, and we will be back again, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.